You wake to the sound of dripping water, slow, deliberate, echoing through vaulted stone. The scent of oil and sweat clings to the air. Beneath your fingertips, the marble is warm, slick with the touch of 1,000 others. Around you, torchlight trembles against mosaics of gods entwined in endless embrace. The empire breathes here in the baths, where every secret begins with steam. Before we plunge deeper into the heat of Rome, take a moment to breathe in this world of marble and myth. If you're watching from London, Lahore, São Paulo, or Seoul, know that this story of empire and desire once bound continents together long before our screens did. Tap the like button, share where in the world you're watching from, and let's step into the ancient water together, where power was not written in law, but on skin. The baths of Caracalla were not merely places to wash, they were cathedrals of the body. Within their echoing chambers, the hierarchy of Rome dissolved, or seemed to. Senators and slaves, merchants and gladiators, here all were equal in nakedness. Yet equality was an illusion. Even stripped of robes, status clung to every gesture. The senator's servant poured his oil, the freedwoman's glance lingered too long, and somewhere in that dance of glances, the empire revealed its truth. Power was not only spoken, it was touched. Rome did not invent indulgence, it perfected it. Marriage, for the elite, was not love, but strategy. Daughters were offered like dowries of flesh, alliances sealed not with blood, but with bedchambers. A senator's daughter might be promised to a man 3 times her age because his name could elevate hers. The wedding feast would gleam with honeyed figs and gold-leafed bread, but behind the laughter lay a quiet bargain. Her body was Rome's currency, her silence its guarantee. And yet, beneath this machinery of propriety, desire seethed. At night, behind frescoed walls, the same patricians who preached restraint sought pleasure in the Subura, the city's underbelly. There, taverns reeked of sour wine and roasted chickpeas. Laughter spilled into alleys lit by flickering oil lamps. For a few denarii, a man could purchase not merely a body, but an illusion, the freedom to forget his own chains. Even the emperor was not immune. Stories whispered through marble corridors of Nero dressing as a bride, of Caligula naming his favorite mare as consort. To some, madness; to Rome, merely appetite given crown and title. What did it mean, in such a world, to own a body? For the enslaved, it meant being reduced to a commodity more precious than coin. A young Greek boy captured after war might find himself in the villa of a senator, trained not for labor, but for charm. He learned the art of silence, the glance that pleased, the bow that disguised humiliation. The historian Suetonius tells of banquets where servants were ordered to stand naked, painted in gold, as living decoration, flesh as ornament, submission as art. But Rome's appetite was not without fear. Beneath every feast lay anxiety, of decay, of moral collapse. The moralists, like Seneca, warned that indulgence eroded the soul. Luxury, he wrote, has made us forget who we are. And yet even he, stern philosopher of restraint, wrote letters from villas adorned with fountains and perfumed walls. Hypocrisy was not a flaw of Rome. It was its rhythm. In the Forum, statues of chastity and virtue watched over brothels discreetly tucked behind temples. A priest might deliver a sermon against vice, then disappear into the shadowed streets. The laws of Augustus sought to restore purity, punishing adultery with exile. But who defined virtue in a city where emperors bedded their sisters and poets wrote odes to forbidden love? When Ovid published Ars Amatoria, teaching men and women the art of seduction, Augustus banished him, not for lying, but for telling the truth too beautifully. Even the divine bowed to Rome's obsession. Venus, goddess of love, shared her shrines with Mars, god of war, pleasure and conquest, entwined like lovers on a mosaic floor. Every act of domination, whether on the battlefield or in the bedchamber, reflected the same hunger: to possess, to conquer, to be remembered. And so, in the baths of Caracalla, the cycle continued. Steam rose. Voices murmured beneath domes painted with gods who never blinked. A soldier, scarred from campaign, leaned against the marble, his eyes closing as oil slicked across his back. Somewhere beside him, a senator discussed new taxes. Two slaves carried towels, whispering in Greek. A courtesan passed, laughter soft as perfume. In that moment, Rome seemed eternal, an empire whose heartbeat echoed through every body within it. But history listens closely. It hears the tremor beneath the marble, the sound of strain, of desire devouring itself. For every statue of Venus, there was a crucifixion outside the city walls. For every banquet of pleasure, a famine of mercy. The baths that once gleamed with heat and light would, centuries later, fall silent, their pools filled with dust and weeds. Still, when you walk through their ruins today, the air feels heavy, almost alive, as though the steam never truly vanished, only turned invisible. The empire of flesh has crumbled, yet its ghost lingers. In our language, our art, our unspoken hungers. And somewhere in that ghostly silence, one question endures. When a civilization learns to worship the body, how long before it forgets the soul? Midnight in ancient Rome was never truly dark. In the torchlit courtyards of temples, shadows writhed like living things. The air smelled of smoke, myrrh, and sweat. Cloaked figures gathered before the statue of Venus, faces hidden behind veils of linen and oil. Drums began, a low, relentless heartbeat, and what began as worship slowly shifted into something unrecognizable. The chant rose, the bodies moved, and holiness gave way to hunger. Religion in Rome was not built for faith, it was built for transaction. Gods did not ask for belief, they demanded performance. Every prayer, every offering was a negotiation. If a man wanted love, he burned incense. If a woman wanted fertility, she poured wine and danced barefoot in the forum. The Romans believed that the divine could be tempted, even seduced. Their world was not separated into sacred and profane. It was bound by both, tangled in the same silk thread. Nowhere was that more vivid than in the cult of Cybele, the Magna Mater, the Great Mother. Her worship arrived from the east, thundering across seas and mountains, bringing with it a new kind of divinity, wild, ungoverned, dangerous. Her priests, called Galli, paraded through the streets in ecstatic frenzy, their bodies painted, their hair perfumed. They struck drums and cymbals until their hands bled, and in the height of their madness, they offered the ultimate devotion, castration. Ancient writers describe the moment with uneasy awe. To be taken by the goddess was to be consumed by her. One priest, drenched in crimson, cried, "I die that I may live for her." To the crowd, it was both horror and miracle, a spectacle of pain transfigured into holiness. For the Galli, renouncing manhood was not punishment, it was liberation. They became the in-between, neither male nor female, both servant and embodiment of the goddess herself. But Rome was a city that tolerated ecstasy only when it could be controlled. The Senate, alarmed by these rites, outlawed Roman citizens from joining, and yet the processions continued in secret, their drums echoing through alleyways long after curfew. Even in suppression, the cult thrived, because the deeper Rome sought to restrain desire, the more the people longed to see it sanctified. Every spring, during the Floralia, the festival of Flora, those longings spilled into daylight. The goddess of flowers and fertility demanded joy, and Rome obeyed. Streets burst with color, petals scattered like confetti, and performers stripped on stage to the laughter of crowds. Prostitutes, normally scorned, were honored as priestesses for the day, offering garlands to the goddess. What had been shame became sacrament. For a few days each year, the city forgot its boundaries. Even the poets joined the celebration. Ovid wrote of Flora as she who loosens the girdles of women and the hearts of men. Yet beneath his verses lies a warning, because to unbind desire was also to invite chaos. As the sun set, laughter turned to fever, wine replaced reason, and by morning the cobblestones ran with spilled grapes and forgotten vows. The festival was both rebirth and ruin, proof that Rome could never decide whether pleasure was divine reward or divine test. Beyond the public festivals lay the private forbidden arts, the magic of desire. In the dim corners of tenement rooms, women whispered spells into lead tablets, deficciones, to bind the hearts of lovers or curse their rivals. Archaeologists have found them buried beneath doorways, inscribed with desperate prayers. May his sleep know no rest until he returns to me. The letters carved unevenly, often by shaking hands. Some even mixed blood or hair into the wax, proof that love in Rome was as much an act of violence as devotion. In these rites, sex was not mere pleasure, it was invocation. To touch was to summon, to join body and spirit in the same breath. The Romans believed that through passion one could reach the gods themselves. But what happens when a civilization begins to confuse worship with desire? When every altar becomes a mirror, reflecting not the divine, but the human hunger beneath. As the empire expanded, so did its pantheon of temptation. From Egypt came Isis, whose rites promised resurrection through ecstasy. From Greece, Dionysus, whose followers howled through moonlit hills, tearing animals apart in sacred delirium. Rome absorbed them all, unable or unwilling to resist. The city of discipline became a city of indulgence disguised as piety. And yet, the more Rome chased divine pleasure, the more it feared its own reflection. In whispered decrees and midnight raids, temples were shuttered, cults outlawed. But faith cannot be extinguished. It only changes shape. The people still prayed to Venus, to Flora, to Cybele, though now in secret. The incense burned softer, the drums quieter. The goddess still listened. Centuries later, when Christianity rose upon Rome's ruins, the new priests condemned these rites as corruption. But in their hymns and prayers, echoes of the old rhythms remained. The longing for transcendence, the ache for union, the trembling between sin and salvation. The torchlight fades from the temple walls. The drums are silent now. Yet if you listen, in the ruins of those ancient shrines, you can still hear the faint pulse beneath the stone, a heartbeat too human to ever truly die. For in Rome, even holiness bled, and somewhere between worship and desire the gods learned to look like us. The crowd roared like an ocean. Beneath the marble arches of the Circus Maximus, tens of thousands shouted for blood, for glory, for spectacle. Dust rose in clouds from the chariot tracks, mingling with the perfume of the patrician seats and the sweat of slaves who hauled the day's winnings through the gates. In this thunder of bodies and voices, a man in a senator's robe drew his hood low. His hand, adorned with a gold seal of office, passed a coin to a merchant. The merchant nodded, and from the shadow behind him stepped a girl, no older than 15. That same hand would, by morning, be raised in the Forum to pass another law on public morality. In Rome, virtue was theater, and shame, its most profitable act. The age of Augustus had promised rebirth, a city cleansed of corruption, an empire bound by moral reform. He built temples to the gods of fidelity and punished adultery as treason against the state. The poet Ovid, whose verses dared to teach men the art of seduction, was banished to the edges of the empire, condemned to loneliness for revealing what Rome already practiced in secret. For Augustus, purity was not faith, it was policy. The empire's body, he declared, must be as disciplined as its legions. But who, in the heat of Rome, could remain untouched by desire? Beneath the marble sermons of law, the city's heart still pulsed with appetite. The Subura, Rome's underbelly, was a labyrinth of taverns, brothels, and sweat-soaked laughter. There, the powerful came disguised in cloaks, seeking what their titles denied them. Slave girls were auctioned beneath oil lamps. Boys from Greece and Syria whispered their prices in Latin they barely understood. A Roman coin could buy obedience, but never silence. And in the silence, scandal fermented like wine left too long in the sun. One name lingered above all others: Messalina, empress, wife to Claudius, and to many, the embodiment of Rome's double life. The poets wrote of her midnight wanderings, her disguises as a common prostitute, her insatiable contests of pleasure. In whispered rumor, she was said to have challenged the courtesans of the city to a contest, who could take more lovers before dawn. The Empress won. When dawn came, she returned to the palace, her hair perfumed, her face serene, as if the night's sins were only another duty of her crown. But Rome adored its sinners only long enough to crucify them. When her intrigues threatened the emperor himself, Messalina was hunted through the gardens of Lucullus. The historian Tacitus tells of her final moments, cornered, trembling, too afraid to take her own life. "Strike," she begged the soldier sent to end her. And with that, the woman who had ruled through desire met the cold discipline of the empire she had mocked. Her name became a curse and a legend. Rome learned from her death what it always knew. Scandal was never truly buried. It was embalmed. Statues of chastity rose higher, while the same courtyards echoed with laughter and whispered bargains. The law of Augustus, meant to purify, instead sharpened hypocrisy into art. Wives were exiled for infidelity, yet emperors paraded their lovers through public feasts. Stoic philosophers preached restraint, even as they owned harems of enslaved concubines. The city that once worshipped Venus now pretended to fear her. In the sculpted silence of its tombs, Rome revealed its truest confession. Marble coffins carved with lovers entwined, their forms eternal, their stories unnamed. In death, what the living denied was permitted: touch, union, surrender. The Roman afterlife was not of angels or ascension, but of endless embrace. Even as its moral codes hardened, its art remembered the body. The contradiction was carved in stone. What was shame to Rome, truly? Was it a weapon of power or a mirror of desire? When a senator condemned immorality, he did so before an audience, his virtue a performance, his guilt its script. The empire learned that control could be maintained not by suppression, but by spectacle. To watch another fall was to cleanse oneself. The crowd in the circus cheered for the punished adulteress, the exposed priest, the humiliated actor, not because they were outraged, but because they were absolved. In that sense, Rome was not so distant from us. It was the first civilization to understand that moral outrage is addictive. The more it condemned, the more it consumed. The more it demanded purity, the more it obsessed over sin. The empire's laws against pleasure became the machinery of its corruption. When the old gods fell silent and the cross rose over Rome, the theater did not close. It only changed its name. The emperors who once paraded mistresses now wore halos. Desire was recast as temptation, sin as confession. But the audience was the same, still waiting, still hungry, still watching others burn for what it secretly longed to feel. The Circus Maximus is silent now. The stands have crumbled, the dust long settled. Yet if you walk its ruins at dusk, you might still hear the faint echo of applause. An empire cheering not for victory, but for virtue performed upon its own decay. For Rome discovered what every civilization eventually learns. Shame, once invented, never dies. It only changes masks. And the play, our play, never truly ends.